Welcome to Alien Whisper, where sizzling hot alien women and emotional sci-fi alien stories await you. If you enjoy thrilling adventures between humans and extraterrestrial beings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below the video. Now, let's dive into the story. Captain Seth Jensen had always been drawn to the unknown. Growing up in a small town in Texas, he spent his childhood devouring science fiction novels and dreaming of exploring distant worlds. His parents had always encouraged his curiosity, but they never imagined he'd one day become one of Earth's most decorated scout pilots. Now, at 35, Seth was a veteran of the Earth Alliance's Scout Division, with over a dozen missions under his belt, most of them in uncharted territories where no human had ever set foot. But this mission was different. Sector Omega-9 was a black hole of information, a region so far from Earth's known space that even the most advanced telescopes couldn't penetrate its mysteries. When the call for volunteers came, Seth didn't hesitate. If not me, then who? He told Admiral Carter during their final briefing. The Delta 7, affectionately nicknamed Odyssey by Seth, was a marvel of human engineering. Sleek and compact, it was designed for stealth and speed, perfect for reconnaissance missions in hostile or unknown environments. Its hull was lined with experimental heat shields, and its engines could handle speeds that would make most pilots black out. But even Odyssey had its limits. As Seth piloted through the void of Sector Omega-9, a strange sensation crept over him. The stars here were different, brighter, somehow, and arranged in patterns that no human astronomer had ever catalogued. He was truly alone, farther from home than anyone had ever been. Just another day at the office, he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the unease. Then, without warning, the control panel lit up like a Christmas tree. Alarms blared, and red lights flashed across the cockpit. What the? Seth's hands flew across the controls, but nothing responded. The navigation system went dark, followed by life support. Mayday! Mayday! Scout Vessel Delta 7 experiencing catastrophic system failure, he shouted into his comms, knowing full well that no one could hear him. He was too far from any relay network, adrift in unexplored space. His mind raced back to his training. He had simulated emergency landings countless times, but never in such extreme conditions. The ship was shaking violently, and the atmosphere was thicker than he anticipated. He could feel the G-forces pressing him into his seat, making it hard to breathe. "Come on, Odyssey, just hold together a little longer," he growled through gritted teeth, his hands gripping the controls with all his strength. The ground rushed up to meet him. An emerald-green canopy of dense jungle foliage stretched out as far as he could see. Seth pulled back on the controls, trying to level out, but it was no use. The ship skimmed the treetops, branches snapping against the hull with loud cracks, before slamming into the soft earth with a deafening crash. The impact threw him forward against his restraints with bone-crushing force. Pain exploded across his chest and head as the cockpit crumpled around him. He tasted blood in his mouth and felt a sharp pain in his side. As darkness closed in, he thought of his sister back on Earth, wondering if she would ever know what happened to him. Then, everything went black. Time passed in fragmented moments of semi-consciousness. Seth drifted in and out, aware of the taste of blood in his mouth and the sound of his emergency beacon wailing in the distance. The air grew thick with smoke, making each shallow breath a struggle. Then, a new sound penetrated his haze, voices speaking in a language he'd never heard before, a mix of clicks and melodic tones that echoed through the jungle. Seth forced his eyes open, his vision blurring as he tried to focus on the figures moving outside the shattered viewport. They weren't human. That much was clear even through his compromised vision. Tall, athletic forms with skin in varying shades of purple and blue moved with a grace that was both alien and mesmerizing. Their features were humanoid, but distinctly otherworldly. Angular faces with large, luminous eyes that reflected the afternoon sunlight like polished amber, catching the light in a way that reminded Seth of fireflies back home. One of them, clearly male judging by his broad-shouldered build, peered into the cockpit, his golden eyes widening at the sight of Seth. Help! Seth managed to whisper, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Please! The alien male turned to his companions, gesturing animatedly with sharp, deliberate motions. Seth counted 5 of them, all carrying primitive-looking weapons, spears tipped with what appeared to be bone or tooth, gleaming in the sunlight. They wore leather-like armor adorned with intricate patterns and symbols he couldn't decipher, swirling designs that looked like they told stories of their people. An argument broke out among them. Even without understanding their words, Seth could sense the conflict. Some wanted to help him, their tones softer, while others, their voices harsh and clipped, clearly did not. Then, a smaller figure pushed through the group. Unlike the others, whose hair was tied back in intricate braids woven with beads that clinked softly as they moved, this one's long black hair flowed freely around a distinctly feminine face. Her skin was a deeper purple than her companions', almost royal in its richness, and gold armor accentuated her curves, catching the sunlight as she moved with predatory grace. She locked eyes with Seth through the broken viewport, her expression unreadable, but her gaze was intense, like she was sizing him up. Without breaking her gaze, she spoke a single command to the others, her voice musical yet authoritative, cutting through the argument like a knife. Kithra, one of them said, and Seth committed the name to memory as darkness began to reclaim him. He felt rather than saw the aliens working to free him from the wreckage, their strong hands carefully extracting his broken body from the twisted metal. Pain flared white-hot as they moved him, drawing an agonized groan from his lips, and he caught the scent of something herbal, like crushed leaves, as they tended to him. Seth caught one last glimpse of Kithra standing above him, her face haloed by the alien sun, her expression now showing a flicker of what might have been curiosity, or perhaps pity. He wanted to thank her, to ask where they were taking him, but his body had reached its limit. As consciousness slipped away, Seth wondered if he would wake again. And if he did, what kind of world he would find himself in, a world where the air was thick with humidity, the jungle alive with strange calls, and the beings around him were as mysterious as the stars he'd left behind. Seth's recovery was slow but steady, thanks to Vzra's expert care. The elderly healer's hands were gentle yet firm as she applied herbal salves to his wounds and taught him basic Vashkai words. Seth, she would say, pointing to him, then Vzra, tapping her chest. He repeated the words, his pronunciation clumsy at first but improving daily. But it was Lyra, a young Vashkai girl with bright golden eyes and an infectious curiosity, who became his true language teacher. She visited him often, bringing fruits from the jungle or simply sitting by his side, eager to learn about his world while teaching him hers. Kren, she said one day, pointing to a towering tree with broad leaves. Tree, Seth replied in English, then tried to mimic her pronunciation. Kren, he said, grinning as she clapped her hands in delight. Through these lessons, Seth began to piece together the Vashkai language. He learned that Vash meant earth or land, and Zara was water. He also discovered snippets of their culture, like how they honored their ancestors with nightly chants, or how they believed the forest itself was alive, watching over them. But as Seth grew stronger, he couldn't ignore the growing tension in the village. The Razorbacks were becoming a constant threat. At first, they attacked sporadically, but now their raids were more frequent, more organized. Seth overheard warriors speaking of lost livestock and damaged huts, their voices heavy with worry. As Seth's strength returned, he began helping with village tasks. He joined the hunters in gathering food, learning to track small game through the dense jungle. He also assisted in repairing damaged huts, using his human ingenuity to suggest new ways of reinforcing structures. One day, while helping build a new hut, Seth noticed Jorix watching him closely. The burly warrior's face was stern, his eyes narrowed. "You build differently," Jorix said, pointing to the way Seth had angled the roof supports for better stability. "It's how we do it on Earth," Seth explained. "It makes the structure stronger." Jorix grunted, unconvinced, but later that day, Seth saw him using the same technique on another hut. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Meanwhile, Seth's bond with Lyra deepened. She was like a little sister to him, always eager to learn about Earth. "Do humans have forests like ours?" she asked one afternoon as they walked through the jungle. "Not exactly," Seth said, smiling. "But we have places called rainforests, full of life just like this." Lyra's eyes sparkled with wonder. "I want to see them someday." "You will," Seth promised, though he wasn't sure if it was possible. Kithra, too, became a constant presence in his life. As the chieftain's daughter, she carried herself with authority, but Seth saw glimpses of vulnerability beneath her warrior exterior. They often trained together, sparring with wooden staves, and Seth found himself admiring her skill and determination. "You're getting better," Kithra said one day after a particularly intense session. She wiped sweat from her brow, her golden eyes meeting his. "So are you," Seth replied, grinning. "But don't tell anyone I said that." She laughed, a rare sound that made his heart skip a beat. The Razorback attacks grew more frequent, and Seth knew he had to do something. One evening, as the village prepared for another raid, he gathered a group of warriors, including Kithra and Jorix, to discuss a new strategy. "These creatures are pack hunters," Seth said, using a mix of Vashkai words and gestures. "They follow a leader, the Alpha. If we take it down, the others might scatter." The warriors exchanged glances. "We've never done that before," Jorix said skeptically. "How do you know this will work?" "I've seen it before," Seth explained. "On Earth, with wolves. Take out the leader, and the pack loses direction." Kithra nodded thoughtfully. "It's worth trying." That night, as the Razorbacks attacked, Seth's plan worked. He spotted the Alpha, a massive beast with a scar across its face, and signaled to Kithra and Jorix. While Kithra distracted it, Seth and Jorix flanked it, striking at its vulnerable spots. With a final roar, the Alpha fell, and the remaining Razorbacks hesitated before retreating into the jungle. The village erupted in cheers, but Seth's mind was already racing. The Razorbacks' behavior was too coordinated for mere animals. There had to be more to this. After each attack, the village was filled with the wounded. Zra did her best, but she was overwhelmed. Seth, remembering his basic first aid training from the Earth Alliance, stepped in to help. "Can I assist?" he asked Zra one day as she tended to a warrior with a deep gash on his arm. She looked up surprised. "You know healing?" "A little," Seth admitted. "I can clean wounds and apply bandages." Zra nodded gratefully. "Over there," she said, pointing to a group of injured Vashkai. Seth worked methodically, using Zra's herbs and ointments to treat cuts and burns. He was careful and gentle, earning nods of approval from his patients. One of them was a young boy named Zeril, who had been caught in the crossfire during a recent attack. "Thank you," Zeril said shyly as Seth wrapped his leg. "You're welcome," Seth replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "You'll be back to running in no time." As he moved from patient to patient, Seth felt a sense of purpose. This was something he could do, something that made a difference. Kithra watched him from across the room, her expression softening. She had seen many warriors, but few who cared for others as much as Seth did. The attacks continued, each one more deadly than the last. Seth noticed patterns. The Razorbacks always came from the same direction, as if being directed. One day, while examining a dead Razorback, he found something that chilled him, a small metal device embedded in its neck, connected to its brain. "Kithra, look at this," he said, pointing to the device. She gasped. "What is it?" "I think it's a control mechanism," Seth said grimly. "Someone is manipulating these creatures." Kithra's eyes widened. "Who would do such a thing?" "I don't know," Seth admitted. "But we need to find out." That night, as they sat by the fire, Seth shared his suspicions with Kithra and Jorix. "These aren't just animals," he said. "They're weapons, and someone is using them against us." Jorix's face darkened. "Then we need to find that someone and stop them." Kithra nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We'll follow their trail. Together." And so, Seth's journey with the Vashkai took a new turn, one that would lead them to uncover a far greater threat than they could have imagined. Seth and Kithra moved silently through the dense jungle, the faint buzz of Seth's scanner guiding them toward the source of the Razorback implant signal. The air was heavy with humidity, and the alien sun cast long shadows through the towering trees, their leaves rustling with the calls of unseen creatures. Sweat beaded on Seth's forehead as he checked the scanner's display, its green glow flickering with data. "Almost there," he whispered, glancing at Kithra. Her golden eyes were sharp, scanning the underbrush for any sign of danger. After hours of trekking, they reached a rocky ridge overlooking a clearing. Below, a metallic structure loomed against the mountainside, its angular surfaces gleaming unnaturally in the fading light. Unlike the Vashkai's organic dwellings, this was cold and mechanical, with glowing lights pulsing along its walls. "Zixorans," Seth said, his voice low. He recognized the design from Earth Alliance briefings. "They're the ones controlling the Razorbacks." Kithra's jaw tightened as she studied the facility. "We need to know their plans. Why are they doing this?" Seth nodded, his mind racing. "Let's get closer, but we stay hidden. One wrong move, and we're done." They descended the ridge, using the dense foliage as cover. As they neared, they saw guards patrolling the perimeter, tall, greenish-gray figures with ridged skulls, clutching energy rifles that hummed faintly. Seth counted 6 visible guards, but the facility's size suggested more inside. "We need to watch them," Kithra said, crouching beside him. "Learn their routines." Seth pulled out his tactical binoculars, scanning the area. "There's a main entrance, heavily guarded. But look, over by that rock formation, the fence is less secure. The guards don't patrol there as often." Kithra followed his gaze. "That's our way in." They settled into a thicket, hidden but with a clear view of the facility. Seth adjusted his scanner to detect energy signatures, mapping the layout. The device picked up multiple heat sources inside, likely machinery or holding pens for the Razorbacks. For hours, they observed, noting the guards' shift changes and patrol patterns. A transport vehicle arrived, unloading crates marked with alien symbols. 2 Zixorans emerged to inspect the delivery, their guttural voices carrying faintly. Seth tweaked the scanner's settings, trying to intercept their communications. "If I can tap into their frequency, we might hear something useful." "Do it," Kithra urged, her eyes fixed on the facility. Static crackled through the scanner, then fragmented voices broke through. "Production on schedule, new batch ready, expand to Western territories." Seth's stomach churned. They're mass-producing Razorbacks and planning to attack other Vashkai villages. Kithra's fists clenched. "We can't let that happen." As night fell, the jungle grew louder with alien sounds. Hoots, chirps, and distant roars that set Seth's nerves on edge. They continued watching, memorizing the facility's rhythm. Then, a stroke of luck, one guard dropped a small device during a patrol. When the coast was clear, Kithra darted out to retrieve it. "It's a data pad," she said, handing it to Seth. The screen displayed maps and schedules, with markers indicating Vashkai settlements across the planet. "They're targeting your entire people," Seth said, his voice grim. "This isn't just about your village, it's genocide." Kithra's eyes blazed with fury. "We strike tonight." Seth hesitated. "We need a plan. If we rush in, we might not make it out." "We don't have time," Kithra countered. "Every moment we wait, they grow stronger." They debated in hushed tones, Seth advocating for stealth, while Kithra's urgency reflected her fear for her people. Finally, they compromised. They'd use the ventilation shaft near the rock formation to enter, sabotage the control systems, and escape before the Zixorans could react. But as they prepared to move, a patrol passed dangerously close. Seth and Kithra froze, their breaths shallow, as the guards' boots crunched on the gravel just feet away. The hum of an energy rifle was deafening in the silence. Seth's heart pounded, but the guards moved on, oblivious. "That was too close," Kithra whispered, her voice shaky. Seth nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's go." Under the cover of darkness, they crept to the ventilation shaft. Seth used a makeshift tool to pry open the grate, and they squeezed inside, crawling through the tight, metallic tunnel. The air was stale, tinged with the scent of oil and machinery. They emerged into a corridor lined with doors, each marked with Zixoran symbols. The hum of technology filled the air, and Seth's scanner picked up faint vibrations from deeper within. "We need the control center," Seth said. "That's where they'll have the main systems." They moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows. As they turned a corner, voices echoed, Zixorans speaking in sharp tones. Seth and Kithra pressed against the wall, holding their breath as two guards passed, carrying trays of equipment. Once clear, they continued until they reached a larger door with a keypad. Seth recalled a code he'd seen during their scouting, 7-3-9-2, and entered it. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a control room, its walls lined with consoles and screens displaying data in Zixoran script. At the center stood a crystalline core, pulsating with blue energy. "This is it," Seth said, "the heart of their operation. If we destroy this, the implants should shut down." Kithra picked up a datapad from a console, scanning its contents. "It confirms the maps. They're planning to wipe out every Vashkai settlement." "Then we end this now," Seth said, grabbing tools from the room. They worked quickly, disconnecting cables and overloading circuits. But as they tampered with the core, an alarm blared, red lights flashing. "We've been detected," Kithra shouted. Guards burst in, energy rifles blazing. Seth and Kithra fought back, Seth using his staff to disarm one guard while Kithra's spear struck another. The room filled with the crackle of weapons and the roar of razorbacks in nearby pens, awakened by the chaos. Seth struck the core with his staff, cracking it. Energy arced wildly, and smoke billowed. "Go," he yelled. They fought through the corridor, Seth taking a hit to his side, pain searing through him. They reached the ventilation shaft and crawled out, the facility shaking behind them as systems failed. In the jungle, Seth collapsed against a tree, clutching his wound. "I'm hit," he gasped. Kithra examined it. "It's not deep, but we need Zra. Come on." As they fled, Seth's mind raced. The Zixorans' plan was bigger than they'd feared, threatening all Vashkai. But they'd struck a blow, and that gave them hope. The Zixoran facility trembled violently as Seth and Kithra raced through its collapsing corridors. The crystalline core they had destroyed pulsed one final time before shattering, sending shockwaves that rattled the walls. Alarms wailed, their piercing shrieks echoing in the smoky air, while red emergency lights cast an eerie glow. The smell of burning circuitry stung Seth's nostrils, and every step sent a jolt of pain through his side, where blood seeped from a wound he'd taken shielding Kithra from a guard's attack. "Seth, stay with me." Kithra's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. Her golden eyes flicked to his injury, but her grip on her spear remained steady. "I'm okay," Seth gasped, though his vision blurred with each labored breath. "We need to get out before this place comes down." They rounded a corner, only to hear the clatter of boots, Zixoran guards closing in. "This way," Seth pointed to a side door, shoving it open with his shoulder. They ducked into a storage room filled with crates and humming machinery, the air thick with the tang of oil. Outside, a guard barked, "They're here." "Spread out." Seth's eyes darted around, landing on a control panel flickering with lights. "If I can overload this, it'll buy us time," he said, his voice strained but determined. Kithra nodded, standing guard at the door. "Hurry." Despite the pain, Seth's fingers moved quickly, rewiring the panel with skills honed in Earth Alliance training. Sparks flew as he crossed circuits, and with a loud pop, a nearby console erupted in flames, sending debris crashing into the corridor. The guards shouted in confusion, their footsteps retreating. "Now!" Kithra hissed, and they slipped out, moving toward an exit. But the facility was a maze, and more guards were converging. Seth spotted a ventilation shaft high on the wall. "Up there," he said, pointing. "It's our best shot." Kithra leapt onto a crate, then a ledge, prying open the grate with her spear. "Go," she urged, helping Seth climb despite his wince of pain. The shaft was cramped, its metal walls cold against their skin, and dust rained down as the facility shook. Seth crawled behind Kithra, each movement agony, his breathing ragged. "We're almost out," Kithra called back, her voice a lifeline in the dark. Finally, they reached an outer grate. Kithra kicked it open, and they tumbled into the jungle, gulping fresh air scented with moss and flowers. But their relief was cut short by the roar of engines. Zixoran transports landing nearby, their lights piercing the dawn. "They're coming for the village," Kithra said, her face grim. "We have to warn them." Seth nodded, though his legs felt like lead. "Let's move." The trek back was brutal. Seth leaned on Kithra, his strength fading as blood soaked his tunic. The jungle buzzed with life, birds chirping, leaves rustling, but beneath it, the hum of Zixoran engines grew louder. "They're gaining on us," Kithra said, her voice tight. Seth's mind raced. "My scanner," he said, pulling it from his belt. Its screen flickered with terrain data. "There's a narrow pass ahead. If we can block it, we might slow them down." "Ow!" Kithra asked, her eyes searching his. "Explosives," Seth replied. "We grabbed some from my ship's wreckage. We could trigger a landslide." They found a cliffside with loose rocks, perfect for their plan. Seth set the charges, his hands shaking from pain and adrenaline, while Kithra kept watch. "Ready," he said, and with a press of a button, the charges detonated. The cliff rumbled, then collapsed, sending boulders crashing across the path. "That'll hold them for a while," Seth said, a weak smile breaking through his exhaustion. Kithra squeezed his arm. "Good work. Now let's go." They reached the village as the sky burned pink with dawn. But their arrival was met with urgency. Dreos, a young Vashkai warrior, sprinted toward them, his face pale. "Zixorans, 8 transports, heading this way." Seth's heart sank. They had hoped for more time, but the Zixorans were relentless. "We need to defend the village," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. Kithra looked at him, concern in her eyes. "You're hurt, Seth. You should rest." "No," he insisted. "I can still help. We need everyone." She hesitated, then nodded. "Stay by me." They rallied the warriors, gathering at a narrow pass that led to the village. Seth, drawing on his military training, directed them to build barricades from logs and stones. "Funnel them here," he explained. "It's a choke point. They'll be vulnerable." The Vashkai worked quickly, their movements precise under Kithra's command. She chanted a war song, her voice rising over the jungle, rallying her people. Seth felt a surge of pride. This was their home, and they would fight for it. As the Zixoran transports roared into view, their engines shaking the ground, Kithra raised her spear. "For Vashkai!" she cried, her voice a battle hymn. The warriors answered with a roar, their weapons gleaming in the morning light. Seth stood beside Kithra, his staff gripped tightly, pain pulsing through his body. But he pushed it aside. This was their stand. "Now!" Seth shouted as the transports entered the pass. Arrows and spears flew, striking the lead transport. It swerved, crashing into another, metal screeching as they tangled. Zixoran soldiers poured out, firing energy rifles that crackled like lightning. The Vashkai met them head-on, their spears flashing in deadly arcs. Seth fought with everything he had, his staff a blur as he disarmed a Zixoran and struck a pressure point, sending him to the ground. But his injury slowed him, and a Zixoran lunged from the side, his blade aimed at Seth's chest. Kithra saw it and reacted, her spear piercing the attacker's shoulder. "Stay with me," she yelled, pulling Seth back. "I'm trying," he gasped, managing a grim smile. They fought as one, their movements synchronized. At one point, Seth spotted a Zixoran commander directing troops from a transport. "He's the key," he told Kithra. "Take him out, and they'll falter." Kithra nodded, and they charged together. Seth distracted the commander with a feint, while Kithra's spear found its mark. The commander fell, and the Zixorans hesitated, their formation breaking. The Vashkai seized the moment, pressing their advantage. Slowly, the tide turned. The last Zixoran fell, and silence settled over the pass, broken only by the warriors' heavy breathing. Seth leaned on Kithra, his strength spent. "We did it," he whispered, a faint smile on his lips. "You're a fool," Kithra said, but her voice was soft, her eyes warm. "Come on, Zra needs to see you." Back in the village, Zra worked swiftly, cleaning Seth's wounds and applying a pungent salve that numbed the pain. "You push yourself too hard," she scolded, wrapping his chest in bandages. Seth chuckled weakly. Can't help it. As he lay in his hut, recovering, his thoughts turned to the emergency beacon. It was still functional, tucked away in his gear from the ship's wreckage. He could activate it, signal an Earth Alliance ship, and return home. The thought tugged at him. His sister in Texas, his old life as a pilot, the stars he'd explored. But then he looked at Kithra, sitting by his side, her hand resting on his. He thought of the village, the children playing, the warriors training, the community that had welcomed him. This was his home now, a place where he belonged. Later, when Kithra stepped out to check on the village, Seth pulled the beacon from his pack. It was small, its surface worn from the crash. He turned it over, imagining the signal piercing the stars, calling him back to Earth. But what would that mean for the Vashkai? Would Earth's arrival bring peace or disruption? He closed his eyes, picturing Kithra's smile, the way her war song had rallied her people. He thought of Dreos, eager to learn, and Vzra, whose kindness had saved him. This was his family now. With a deep breath, he set the beacon down, unactivated. He wouldn't need it. When Kithra returned, she saw the beacon and paused. You could go back, she said softly, to your stars. Seth met her gaze. My stars are here now. With you, with your people. She smiled, a rare, unguarded expression, and took his hand. Then we faced the future together. As the village hummed with life outside, Seth felt a quiet certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready, as a Vashkai, as Kithra's partner, as a man who had found his place under alien skies. The night of the claiming ritual was a moment of profound unity for the Vashkai, a celebration that would be remembered for generations. The village's central fire pit roared with life, its flames leaping toward the star-filled sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the gathered tribe. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood, mingled with the sweet, earthy aroma of ceremonial herbs scattered into the fire. Drums pulsed in a steady rhythm, their deep beats echoing through the clearing like the heartbeat of the jungle itself. Every Vashkai was present, warriors, elders, children, their faces alight with anticipation, their eyes reflecting the fire's glow and a shared sense of pride. At the heart of the circle stood Seth and Kithra, their hands clasped tightly, their gazes locked. Seth's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He stood tall, his Earth Alliance tunic replaced by a Vashkai tunic of woven fibers, adorned with symbols of protection and strength. Kithra, radiant in a ceremonial dress shimmering with crystal beads, looked every bit the warrior princess, her deep purple skin glowing under the firelight. Tarek, the chieftain, rose from his carved wooden throne, his elaborate headdress swaying slightly as he moved. His presence commanded silence, and the drums softened to a low hum. Tonight, he declared, his voice booming across the gathering, we witnessed the claiming of Seth of Earth by my daughter, Kithra. By our ancient laws, they are bound as one, to protect, to honor, and to lead our people into a new dawn. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, and Seth felt a swell of gratitude. These people, once strangers, had become his family, and now they stood ready to embrace him fully. Ma, the spiritual leader, stepped forward, her ceremonial robes shimmering with embedded crystals that caught the firelight like stars. In her hands, she held a bowl of luminescent blue paste, its glow pulsing faintly, and a cord woven from fibers that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, as if infused with the spirits of the forest. She began to chant, her voice a melodic incantation that wove through the air, rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. The words were unfamiliar to Seth, but their meaning resonated deep within him, connecting him to the land, the ancestors, and the future. Seth felt a shiver as Ma approached. She dipped her fingers into the paste and drew intricate patterns on his arms, spirals and lines that told the story of his journey. A fall from the stars, battles against razorbacks, and his defense of the Vashkai. The paste was cool at first, then warmed against his skin, as if sealing his fate. Kithra received the same markings, her purple skin contrasting beautifully with the blue, each symbol a testament to her strength and leadership. The crowd watched in reverent silence. The only sounds the crackling fire and Ma's chant. Ma then took the glowing cord and wrapped it around their joined hands, tying it with a series of intricate knots, each one deliberate and sacred. Blood to blood, breath to breath, she intoned, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. What is claimed cannot be unclaimed. What is bound cannot be severed. The stars witness this joining, and the ancestors bless it. Seth looked into Kithra's golden eyes, seeing his own reflection in their depths. A surge of emotion washed over him, love, commitment, and a sense of destiny he had never known. This was where he belonged, with her, with these people who had become his family. Kithra's grip tightened, her expression a blend of fierce determination and tender affection. "You are mine, Seth of Earth," she said softly, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "And you are mine, Kithra of Vashkai," Seth replied, his voice unwavering despite the whirlwind of feelings inside him. He felt the eyes of the tribe on them, but in that moment, it was just the two of them, bound by choice and love. Ma completed the ritual by pressing a small ceremonial blade against their bound hands, drawing a thin line of blood from each. Seth's red blood mingled with Kithra's violet, a symbolic union of their lives and worlds. The crowd gasped softly, then fell silent, as if the forest itself held its breath. As Ma removed the cord, leaving only the faint trace of mingled blood as evidence of their bond, the tribe erupted in cheers and song. Drums thundered, and dancers moved around the fire, their movements weaving stories of love, war, and unity. Seth and Kithra stood together, accepting the congratulations of their people. Children ran forward, offering woven bracelets, while warriors clapped Seth on the shoulder, their smiles wide. Zra, the healer, approached with a knowing nod, her lavender eyes twinkling. "You've chosen well," she said to Seth, her voice warm. As the celebration continued, Seth felt a profound sense of belonging. He was no longer the stranded astronaut. He was a Vashkai, claimed and accepted, ready to face the future with Kithra by his side.